Terrifying scenes in Midtown Manhattan as office workers run for their lives, hands in the air, and you can see the fear etched on their faces.
Level 3 mobilization, active shooter, 345 Park Avenue.
The 44-story building is the headquarters of the NFL. The shocking surveillance image shows the suspect, identified as 27-year-old Shane Tamura, brazenly marching across a plaza to the skyscraper at 6:28 p.m., an M4 assault rifle at his side.
Security camera footage shows the shooter enter the lobby, turn right, and immediately open fire on an NYPD officer. He then shoots a woman who took cover behind a pillar and proceeds through the lobby, spraying it with gunfire.
The slain NYPD officer is Diderot Islam, a 36-year-old father of two whose wife is expecting their third child next month. The woman shot down in the lobby is 43-year-old Wesley LaPatner, an executive with the investment giant Blackstone. A security guard, 46-year-old Alain Etienne, was shot dead behind his desk.
Incredibly, the gunman allowed a woman who was exiting the elevator to walk away unharmed. Police believe he was looking for the NFL headquarters in the building, but get this, he went to the wrong elevator bank.
He ended up on the 33rd floor where he claimed another victim, 27-year-old Julia Hyman. Then he turned the gun on himself. Dozens of office workers barricaded themselves inside their offices. These guys made a fortress of sofas. Security consultant Bill Stanton says everyone should know how to protect themselves.
It's about reaction time and action. Call 911, grab that fire extinguisher. Someone close the door. We're gonna pile these chairs up behind the door. You're gonna take that fire extinguisher and bash him in the head if God forbid he comes in. And be ready to fight for your life, because we need to be prepared, not scared, for the worst to happen.
There were chilling scenes. Cops carried a man wounded in the shooting spree and frantically performed CPR.
I've been around a long time. I can't remember anything like this happening in New York City, in the middle of Manhattan.
Police found the gunman's BMW. He had double parked. In a heart-wrenching moment, Mayor Eric Adams and Police Commissioner Jessica Tisch watched as the flag-draped body of the slain cop was escorted out of the hospital by an honor guard. His father reportedly suffered a stroke on hearing the news that his only son was dead.
Wow, that is really crazy. As you heard, there was a mass shooting in Manhattan earlier this week. Shane Tamura, a 27-year-old, yes, 27 years old, had his whole life ahead of him. Former high school football player shot 5 people and killed 4 in a Manhattan office building that had the NFL offices before fatally shooting himself. Tamura actually left a 3-page letter claiming that he suffered from a degenerative brain condition linked to repeated head injuries and accused the NFL of hiding the risks to protect its financial interests. Now, what he's actually saying is the same thing that the NFL players said themselves over a decade ago, I think about 15 years ago, when they sued the NFL, and they actually ended up getting a lot of money. A lot of ex-players got a lot of money out of the NFL because they actually did do that. Now, that being said, I don't know if this particular young man's claims hold water for the simple fact that he's only 27. Dude, you didn't play football in like the 80s or something, in the 90s. 10 years ago when you were 17, it was 2015. Everybody already knew football caused concussions back then by 2015 when you were 17. So, I mean, at a certain point, I think if you're going to blame somebody, you'd have to blame your parents for letting you play if you were going to blame somebody. But I digress. Let's get back to the story. Now, he thought he had CTE, but CTE is only diagnosable post-mortem. So you have to be dead to be diagnosed with CTE. You don't know if you have CTE while you're living. But it has been found in over 100 former NFL players. And it is associated with symptoms like memory loss, mood swings, aggression, motor dysfunction, and those types of things. So he might have started having some of those symptoms and said, well, I got CTE. Well, he doesn't really know that. He didn't really know that. He might have just been depressed. You know, depression rates amongst Zoomers, which this young man is, Zoomers and late millennials is off the charts. Suicide rates for Zoomers and late millennials are off the charts, even those who never played football in their lives. And so it really is unfortunate that this young man chose this particular course of action, because, I mean, he might have been able to go to a doctor and say, oh, you know what, your problem isn't that you had too many concussions. You just live in a society that is melting down economically, politically, culturally, and you're just depressed, guy. But, you know, we'll never know because, you know, or should I say he'll never know because he's gone now. Now, experts, I know a lot of people are very paranoid now about CTE. Everybody's heard about CTE, but CTE is not linked to one single brain injury. So if you just got hit in the head once when you were 5, you're not going to get CTE. It comes from repeated blows to the head. You know, it is, you know, you got to be hit many times and often with concussions. And that's why it's linked to contact sports like football or to military combat. Now, this young man played high school football outside of Los Angeles, but did not play in college or professionally. Now, his note and obviously the shooting has intensified the calls to examine the link between, you know, chronic traumatic encephalopathy, which is CTE, and violent crime. And so we've seen a lot of these NFL players crash out, kill themselves, kill each other. And not just football players, but boxers, MMA fighters. I remember in WWE about 20 years ago, there was a very infamous case involving Chris Benoit, who was at one point the WWE champion, one of the greatest wrestlers of all time. He actually killed himself and killed his family. He not only killed himself, but he killed his wife and his child. And when they took his brain out of his head, they found out that he had the brain of an 85-year-old with dementia. He was 40. He was 40 years old, but he had the brain of an 85-year-old man with dementia. And so we're really seeing that the effect of chronic brain injuries, you know, manifesting in a lot of the violence. A lot of times we saw football players and boxers and wrestlers and, you know, people, a lot of these soldiers that come back from wars, and we see them crashing out. A lot of this has to do with the amount of traumatic brain injuries they might have had, either playing their sport or in combat in our society. And to even drive this home, this young man, so his brain could be studied, he shot himself in the chest. He shot himself in the chest as opposed to in the head. That's another phenomenon we saw with, I believe, Dave Duerson, who played for my Chicago Bears, was on the 85 Bears. I believe he shot himself in the chest instead of the head so he could have his brain studied as well. A 2023 study conducted by Boston University Chronic Traumatic Encephalopathy Center showed that the disease is common amongst youth sports. Yeah, it's common amongst youth sports. The study found that more than 40% of young athletes who died before the age of 30 suffered from CTE, which has been reported in patients as early as 17. Wow. The study analyzed the brains of 152 donors. all of whom played contact sports and were younger than 30 when they died. Research found that 63 of the 152 patients had CTE based on the criteria, although most of the cases were considered mild. Most of the donors, including 70% of those who found to have the condition, only played amateur sports, the study found. So these people didn't even go into the NFL or to, professional sports. They just played, amateur sports, maybe in high school or in the amateur ranks. That is terrifying. Something else that has been found over the years, that a large percentage of serial killers had brain trauma, had traumatic brain injuries when they were children. So that's what we're looking at here. That's the type of reality we are looking at in this situation. Young people who were found to have stage 1 or stage 2 CTE suffered the same symptoms as people who were not diagnosed with the disease after their death. Most of their brains were examined as part of a study experienced primarily psychiatric symptoms of anxiety, depression, or behavioral issues such as being easily angered. Experts at the Mayo Clinic report that there are no specific symptoms that are linked directly to CTE. However, some of those who have been diagnosed with degenerative brain injury have experienced cognitive, behavioral, and mood changes. Among those behavioral changes listed by the Mayo Clinic are impulsive behavior and aggression, while medical experts have found that those who experience brain trauma-related symptoms often experience depression or apathy. Wow. Whew. Those who are believed to suffer from CTE often experience symptoms in two ways. Those in their 20s or 30s often deal with depression, anxiety, impulsive behavior, or aggression. The second form of the disease is known to cause symptoms including memory loss and difficulties thinking, which often affects older patients around age 60. So, that's why you look at a lot of these older boxers, they start to become a little unintelligible. Like, I was listening to Mike Tyson not too long ago. I was going, oh man, bro. Listen to Evander Holyfield. I don't think they have Parkinson's. At least they haven't told us that they have Parkinson's. But they certainly sound different than they did when they were young after a career of boxing. And then you have guys like, say, Sugar Ray Leonard and Floyd Mayweather who sound completely fine. It really does seem like it's the luck of the draw. Now, given the severity of CTE, the disease tends to create hysteria. So a lot of people are very paranoid and a little bit hypervigilant about this disease. However, statistically, more than 4 years of high school football are generally needed to produce the level of trauma needed to place a person at significant risk of CTE. So while it is possible that you could be a young man in high school or something and get CTE, it's unlikely. It's unlikely. It's possible, but unlikely. The average person who is diagnosed with the condition generally has to play at least 5 years of football, including 2 at the high school level. So again, you're generally not going to get CTE just playing football most of the time. Like just being a high school football player most of the time. Like this young man, Shane Tamura, was. It's unlikely. It's possible. He might be right. He might have had CTE. Who knows? But it's unlikely. Usually it takes 5 years of that type of football pounding, at least, to put you in a at high risk. There are limited cases of those who did not play football beyond high school who are later diagnosed with the disease. So, like I said, it happens, but it's rare. The study also found that CTE is diagnosed more in boxers than those who played football, which, I mean, like in football, you're not trying to hit your head. Like hitting your head is coincidental, which is why they wear those helmets. But in boxing, getting hit in the head is part of the job. That's literally the whole point, is to hit the head of your opponent. So you're much more likely to get it playing in boxing than you will even in football. Now, this is what really surprised me. Sports concussions and CTE tend to be associated with football, as we're talking about, but, and this is a big but, you guys want to listen to this. A Northwestern university suggests that female soccer players may face the highest risk of CTE. This research, presented at the 2017 annual meeting of the American Academy of Orthopedic Surgeons, analyzed trends from over 40,800 reported high school sports injuries. The studies found that concussions were more common in girls' soccer than any other sport. Wow, that is crazy. We don't tend to think of soccer as being some really dangerous sport, especially not for women. We don't tend to think of women's soccer as this really horrific, dangerous sport that you don't want your daughter to play. Most people would want their daughter to play soccer. You know, it teaches them about teamwork. It teaches them about camaraderie, teaches them about sharing. Most people just think, you know, I want my daughter to play soccer, but that actually might be the single most dangerous thing you could do for your daughter, is put her in soccer. Female athletes also tend to suffer more severe and prolonged concussion symptoms than men do. Wow. That knocked me out right there. I never thought of women's sports as being dangerous. Unless you're Caitlin Clark. That's a joke. But I never tend to think of women's sports as being dangerous at all. Never thought of it. Never thought of it whatsoever that women's sports would be dangerous. A study published in Scientific American found that the median concussion recovery time for boys was 11 days. 11 days. For girls, 28 days. So the median time that it takes for a woman or a girl to recover from a concussion is over twice as much as their male counterparts. It takes about a month for a girl to recover from a concussion. A month. Now, why is this? Researchers have hypothesized, this is just a hypothesis, so don't call me, yelling at me, that the difference could be due to neck strength between the genders. Women have smaller necks, making them more prone to whiplash and rotational forces, leading to more severe brain injuries. Hormonal differences may also play a role in injury and recovery times. Wow. Now, again, that is not something that's just not something I could have ever in a million years thought to be true. Women's soccer, women's sports, more dangerous than men's sports. I mean, unfortunately, it doesn't end there, because this whole topic sent me down a rabbit hole, and it's unfortunate, but I hate to bring this up. But another study from the National Institute of Health indicated that women who experienced intimate partner violence, IPV, domestic violence, with repetitive head trauma are at risk of CTE, similar to athletes in contact sports. Wow. Again, not something you tend to think about. We don't tend to think about our moms, our sisters, our girlfriends, our daughters, our grandmothers. Think about how many of our grandmothers, especially back in the 50s and 60s when domestic violence was not only common, but often encouraged. You know, you can see ads in the newspaper telling dudes to slap their wives if they didn't make them the right coffee. I mean, how many of our grandmothers who ended up with Parkinson's or ended up with Alzheimer's, a lot of them were beaten women who suffered from years of concussions. That is absolutely heartbreaking to me to realize that. I mean, we already know that domestic violence is a traumatic event, that it is a traumatizing experience for anybody involved in it. We don't tend to think that a lot of the women in our lives could be walking around punch drunk. CTE and degenerative brain dysfunction and disorders affect the type of decisions we make. It affects our ability to think clearly, to be rational, to control our impulses. That's why it's associated with so much violence for so many young men who end up with it, and just people who end up with it. So a 2018 study of brain injuries found that women exposed to IPV-related head trauma exhibited neurological symptoms consistent with traumatic brain injury, potentially progressing to CTE with repeated incidents. And we talked about domestic violence many times on this show. We talk about it all the time. I just talked about it a few months ago when that young woman and her children were unfortunately killed by her partner in Lake Station. Young sister was killed, and also the woman in Chicago. They were killed like the same week. Young sister in Chicago was killed by her boyfriend. The more we learn scientifically, the more we learn how traumatizing domestic violence can be. It's not just something that, well, affects the people involved. We're talking about permanent traumatic brain injury, which affects a person's ability to be able to live and function in society, at school, at work, at church, within a family structure. And so this whole situation has just really woke me up to the idea that we could be having tens of millions of people here in this country, tens of millions of men and women who are walking around with permanent traumatic brain injuries. These are people who are driving cars. They're driving cars. They're driving trains. They're flying planes. They're cooking our food. They're waiting on us in restaurants. There are nurses and doctors in the hospital. We have all these people who are dealing with these sort of symptoms, and like we don't even know it, man. And that's why it's important to continue to shine a light on these types of things, especially when we talk about the effects of domestic violence and the effects of sports. I don't even know. I mean, I'm so torn about this now because I love football. I'm just gonna be real with you. Boxing's my favorite sport. I love boxing. I love football. I know a lot of people love soccer and love MMA. Are we going to have to live in a world in the future where we don't have boxing or MMA or football or women's soccer? Or are we going to be able to drastically change these sports to where they don't cause traumatic brain injuries? I don't know. I genuinely don't know what the answer is. If you have the answer, give me a call, 219-885-1371. That number again, 219-885-1371. We're about to go to a break here, but when we get back, we're going to talk about an issue that finally there seems to be a somewhat of a consensus developing on. It took 2 years, but there seems to be a consensus from conservatives, from liberals, from Republicans, from Democrats, from the left, from the right. Gaza's a genocide, folks. Gaza is a genocide. We'll be right back after these.